SubNautica can make you forget how to breathe. Which is kind of ironic for an underwater game, but we'll get back to SubNautica in a second. If you have even just one creative bone in your body, then when they're cracked, base building games are just the best. But finding the right one can be harder than surviving the first night with no walls. So whether you're into min-maxing or just vibing with something you've made, friends and fan suggestions led to 2 sleepless months of grind so I could put together 10 solid entries with something for everyone. Early access titles are mostly off the table as they're getting a dedicated video next. These are games that you'll either already love or definitely need to check out. I'm handing out awards because why not? I'm going to hit the ground running with my favourite, and then I'll hand out a few brief nods to the hidden gems before working up through the big bosses. Let's go. If you like what you see, then remember that a like or even a subscribe is always massively appreciated. Thank you very much. SubNautica boasts a level of immersion that is so unyielding, you'll often forget that you and the protagonist are not one and the same. Part game and part experience, SubNautica is a thrilling survival adventure set in an alien ocean to a backdrop of mystery and beauty that can both be as mesmerizing as they are unforgiving. Be it the night cycle, muddy water, or the ocean's depth, the varying visibility rarely increases enough to reveal the true extent of the colossal expanses of water that you'll move through. But know that they are massive, with multiple square kilometers of seabed painstakingly crafted by hand. Squeeze through crevices where the industrial lighting of your machines can't follow, and your reliance on bioluminescent reefs can easily lull you into a false sense of peace. But swim a little too far and a little too deep, and your nervous system might just get eviscerated by a monstrous scream that sounds like God gargling razor blades. And be damn sure that that ain't just some sound effect.
Because we're being hunted.
If by some chance you fail to appreciate the relevance of that vital solitary warning that signals the worst, then it will take just one shocking death in the jaws of a Leviathan sea serpent to know that the always tense, often thrilling, and occasionally terrifying world of SubNautica needs to be approached with caution at absolutely all times.
Welcome aboard, Captain. All systems online.
That is exactly why your base, your warm, humming, oxygen-rich cocoon of safety is so essential. In a world where progression demands prolonged sessions of tension, your robust and tech-filled habitat is one of the very few fragments of your advanced civilization you have to rely on, and along with your fabrication technology and vehicles, it serves as your lifeline. It's where you rest, recharge your tools, repair your battered vehicles, and pretend that the abyss outside doesn't exist, except when admiring it through enameled glass. And as your habitat becomes your home, it'll be where you repaint your submarine, deploy drones to scout out for resources, proudly admire your fruit gardens, and maybe even a giant aquarium full of alien fish. But it isn't just the creatures that fuel your dread as you climb back into the sea. It's the vastness, the silence, the crushing pressure from 1,000 meters of darkness. And just when you think you've hit your limit, the narrative, which is one part Alien, one part The Martian, and one part what if Ridley Scott had a submarine phase like James Cameron, will go and dangle some coordinates in front of you alongside a tantalizing lead that rarely fails to reveal some kind of epic discovery that far surpasses your expectations. Don't let the name or the cartoony box art fool you. This is a sci-fi epic that once it sinks its hooks in, it will never let go. You'll start by building so that you can survive, but before you know it, while hunting for resources to help you survive, you'll suddenly realize that you've started to explore. You've started to want to understand. You'll wonder why your spaceship exploded and what led to so many failed attempts at survival before you. Every dive into a dark cave or volcanic hell pit that may or may not result in you crossing paths with a screaming sea monster is balanced with a glorious moment when you finally make it back to your base. Climb in.
Welcome aboard, Captain.
Dripping wet as you soak up the contrasting neon lights as you pad down the corridors, listening to the metal gangways clunk underfoot. Hearing soothing sounds like your nuclear generator that penetrates the walls with a distinctly man-made, ocean-defying hum, which are just some of the countless brilliant sounds and music that the game never ceases to deliver. Every new tech you unlock, every depth mod, thermal generator, and ethically questionable fish tank is a badge of honor, proving that you earned your right to survive here. And as you enlarge and restructure and restock and reassess your base, it will grow into one of the most immersive in-game habitats you have ever known. Starting as a humble little bubble of safety and into a sprawling fortress of solitude with glass corridors and alien containment chambers and a ridiculous coffee machine that technically does nothing, but you'll still waste resources putting it down anyway because it feels homely. And little more than your perpetually sarcastic AI companion to keep you company.
It may help to remember that problems exist only where you choose to see them.
It really is not just a base, it becomes a home, one that you've built piece by hard-earned piece while dodging creatures that could swallow your submarine whole if you let them. Originally intended to be a responsible, science-based game that contrasted Unknown World's previous gun-heavy shooter, when player feedback responded with overwhelming positivity to scary creatures and exciting sci-fi plot points, they continue to tack on piece after piece, which is why the escalating set pieces and story direction are so unexpected. And makes the holistic resolution to the story so impressive, as this is definitely a game with a beginning, a middle, and a whopper of an end, and in my humble opinion, perhaps one of the best gaming experiences of my life. The spin-off DLC, Below Zero, traded Subnautica's tense isolation for a lighter tone, its tight-lipped protagonist for a jarring and cocky one.
Holy smokes! That did not go as planned.
And the mesmerizing story for a faster-paced but pretty hole-ridden plot. And while it is undoubtedly fun and extremely playable, its best addition, which was the expanded base building functions, were subsequently ported into the original. And this means it is a fun follow-up, but absolutely not a substitute. The upcoming sequel, which is featuring 4-player co-op, could impact the series' signature solitude, but base building as a group is so much fun, and so it could be really promising. Still, if the immersion and story are even half as good as the original, then to even think about spoiling it by dabbling in early access is madness, in my humble opinion. Subnautica is a rare game that balances fear of the unknown with the comfortable familiarity of a space you've built, combining tension and comfort into a loop that's as addictive as it is emotionally exhausting. Subnautica wins countless awards, but as a base builder, it dominates as the most immersive base building survival adventure. Cataclismo. If they are billions met Lego and had an anxious child, it would be named Cataclismo.
Let's carry on.
As a PvE fortress defense game, and a good one at that, it could only be described as a hybrid base builder at best. However, the brick-by-brick approach to building up your structures makes the process a far more personal and creative experience than all of the rival tower defense games out there that in almost every other case are underpinned by a city building experience.
The horrors are coming.
An engaging story pulls you in so smoothly that your base building skills will evolve under your nose without you even noticing. Before long, you'll get a buzz just thinking about jumping into the next level so that you can nail that perfect blend of function and form once again. No Man's Sky. To each their own, but a lackluster narrative delivered through text-based dialogue was always a stumbling block for me, and 10 years on, nothing's changed. But dipping back into what's widely claimed to be an ever-improving experience did leave me with some pretty immersive memories thanks to the sometimes intoxicating planet generation and awesome interplanetary animations. But the showstoppers continue to be the mind-bending bases made by other players, from underwater cities to literal floating space stations, which almost convinced me to hang around the lonely sci-fi sandbox for a little bit longer. Almost. Green Hell. A painfully punishing game dedicated to the misery of jungle life. The base building here is more of a necessity than a joy, which can pretty much describe the entire game. The rich atmosphere and host of nuanced survival elements cannot be denied, and for the hardcore survivalist it is a treat. But if base building is what you're here for, the game will punish you for being so naive. Because every minute spent enjoying the game's expansive build mechanics is hard earned and matched to keeping yourself alive and healthy in an unfriendly environment. but that makes it so much sweeter if you do manage to pull off an impressive base. There is a solid narrative to unpack as well, although I think it's pretty convoluted and the voice acting does leave a little bit to be desired.
Very well. You can catch up, yes?
But drop the ball on the gameplay, they did not.
I can't swallow or breathe.
Just remember that it is called Green Hell for a reason. Breath's Edge. Breath's Edge's quirky style and sharp visuals are charming, as is the delivery of its narrative, although both suffer from, or benefit from, depending on your style of humour, a certain degree of immaturity that simply isn't for everyone.
Someone clearly overestimated the value of the mayonnaise.
Base building from scrap in space is genuinely fun and the mechanics are really good, but there's a consistent lack of refinement to some elements of the gameplay loop that result in monotonous activities, like, for example, having to return and then wait for your air to refill without a clear focus on what to do during that time, and this holds its potential back like a friggin' space anchor. Considering it is a relatively recent release, the bargain bucket price on Steam seemingly reflects these flaws, but if you just want to mess around with some base building, then it's actually a really fair price, and with such a strong foundation, it is conceivable that its upcoming sequel could make tweaks to the formula that, along with an evolution to its fun story, could potentially transform it into one of the most exciting base building games of the year. Terraria. I spent years avoiding Terraria as I just couldn't get on board with the vision of an immersive side-scrolling adventure, and having sunk hours into it, I don't feel much different, but surpassing 3D experiences was never the point. The absurd depth of the crafting system, and the unfathomable scope of the craftable content that surpassed something like 4,000 items is matched to engaging combat and varied terrains, all of which helps build an experience that is addictive and almost never-ending. And its low system requirements also make it super accessible, so even if it's not for you, it's hard not to give it its due on a list about base building. Fortnight. Fortnite's hyper-popularity comes from the fact that it merges so many popular genres under the umbrella of a simple and accessible shooter, and while I'm not denying the surgical skill level of some of its players, its choice to keep the experience mellow and accessible and not force top-tier driving simulation or visceral combat on its players is by design. And this too goes for the base building mechanics, which range from casual backyard forts to mid-combat skyscrapers. And while it won't win any base building awards, it has tricked millions into realizing that slapping together walls and ramps with friends is actually a blast, making Fortnite a gateway drug to base building. 1 minute you're editing walls, and the next you're in Valheim building a Viking spa. Ark: Survival Evolved. This game offers a wild premise to capture the thrill of childhood fantasies, riding and battling dinosaurs, progressing through eras of technology, building high-tech fortresses, and it does an impressive job of achieving it too with its sprawling maps, absurdly deep crafting and survival systems, and a vast array of creatures that can be both entertaining and terrifying. Like so many of its mechanics, the base building is thoughtfully implemented and thoroughly fleshed out, and the wide array of vistas that serve as a backdrop to your adventure do an equally mesmerizing job as the backdrop to pretty much any base you build. However, I simply cannot talk about Ark without outlining its caveats. The clunky dino AI can be as amusing as it is frustrating, but its high grinding requirements are the stuff of legend. Not only because it makes you work hard for your progress, but then it makes you risk it all in high-stakes combat that can hit you with the most almighty punishing setbacks. But while Ark can be frustrating, it can also be so sweet when you pull off your goals. And it's the mix of narrative surprises and rewarding progression that make it a unique platform for a really satisfying base building experience, especially with friends. So whether you're diving into a risky but rewarding PvP or just braving it solo, there's no wrong way to play. The grind is impossible to overlook, and the remastered Survival Ascended was severely mismanaged. But if time is not a resource that you're struggling with and you're into epic builds and long-term goals and have a soft spot for fantasy sci-fi, then this still ever popular original Ark might just be your perfect obsession. Stress testing your base is offered as a free service in Rust. You just need to build one, put something in it, such as your frail, pathetic self, and then watch it try to resist being pecked apart by piranhas. Or better yet, log off and then come back to see if it's been turned into a smouldering crater in the ground. YouTuber montages make building an epic crib look easy, but every new player meets reality fast, either as an unseen bullet to the back of the head, or as a gang of laughing, rock-wielding 12-year-olds destroy you, your spawn point, if you're lucky enough to have one, and your dignity, although it's pretty unlikely you'll have any of that. The game does have some really fun and creative methods of progression, but achieving them requires experience and patience and more than a little luck, which pretty much by design means that the shortest road to success is murder and mayhem. As a result, the rust punk aesthetic certainly sets the game's tone, but it's the ruthlessly hostile player base that maintains the post-apocalyptic vibe. You might envision yourself as Mad Max, I know I definitely did, but if you're thriving, then you're probably a war boy. The only question is, do you remember when it happened? Your stuff basically is your progression, and so this is where bases come in. Construction consists of no-fuss, high-speed, insta-build segments that click together, made from progressively tougher materials to counter progressively more powerful weapons, and it's designed to be snapped together under high pressure, although a thoughtfully selected location means that you shouldn't actually have to do this under fire. Nailing an obscure location that sees other players wander by unaware brings a childlike glee, and equally, tracking another player back to their secret base brings a thrill because raids are basically an essential part of the gameplay loop, but of course you have to remember that that works both ways. And while nice guys don't always finish last in Rust, they rarely finish first, and it can take a few runs before you learn to get on board with the mayhem so as to establish your first base and really get a foothold in the world. If you hide it well enough that it survives you being offline, stockpile it with enough weapons and resources that it withstands the worst raids, and you manage to achieve all of that before the systematic server wipe that sets everybody back to the Stone Age, then by making use of the otherwise useless rust-strewn junk, you can go on to personalize the interior to an impressive degree and experience a level of base building accomplishment that rarely gets sweeter. It might seem like an impossible task at first, but it's the difficult journey that makes it so satisfying when you manage to build one. Of all the memories accrued playing Rust, the fulfillment that comes from establishing a cozy, long-lasting base is usually what hogs the top spot, and it'll do so for about as long as it takes you to build a better one. Rust wins the base building award for high-stakes satisfaction. Grounded shrinks you down to insect size and drops you into your backyard for a playful adventure that's impossible not to compare to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, embracing playful and exaggerating visuals to keep the experience whimsical and fun throughout. By blending a surprisingly engaging narrative with a family-friendly tone, the game does forge its own identity pretty quickly.
Seeing me in your dreams, Willow?
Yep. It's a nightmare.
But while the story does provide mystery and drive your progression, considerably more focus has been placed on the actual gameplay and the vast outdoor playground filled with set pieces and activities than any kind of extravagant storytelling techniques like mocap or immersive animation.
One success after another! I have returned Burgle to his original size!
Match this to the fact that there is a very clear hike in difficulty when tackling the game solo, it reinforces that the game was built with lengthy multiplayer sessions in mind, which is truly when it's at its best, as it provides you with time to get stuck into the grind, which is necessary to either progress or to get your build on. And that is where the wonder begins, because the variety of locations feels almost limitless. And when you stumble across a spot that just speaks to you, you won't be able to resist placing some walls down and having a go. It stirs that kind of nostalgic magic, like the kind that you see in Disney films where tiny creatures and families turn teapots and dollhouses into cozy miniature homes.
A whole room full of winter.
My personal favourite was a half-sunk soda can with a metal shell that not only provides structural integrity and a complete protection, but it also came with emotes to block enemy access, which gave me a really decent amount of floor space to realise my vision. There is a considerable amount of scaling as your reach expands and new resources become available, which is a clever way to steer you down a path of constantly exploring and holding back resources and taking note of potential locations, which goes a long way to making the base building element a standout feature of Grounded. It wins the award for Best Off the Beaten Path Co-op Fun. Built from the ground up with lessons learned from its prequel The Forest, the series mixes Robinson Crusoe with campy B-movie horror tropes and cranks the whole thing up to 11.
When the laws of science are broken.
Delivering a goofy mashup of gory mayhem, survival mechanics, and some seriously exciting base building possibilities. It has certainly earned its loyal cult following, having brought a number of long overdue innovations to the genre, such as your concussed teammate Kelvin, who can be assigned mundane tasks like resource gathering while you focus on important things like pulverizing locals, but its lack of console ports has left it severely shortchanged in the recognition department. Your journey begins after crash landing on an island with a deceivingly tranquil vibe, and no sooner than the sun has set, the island's dark side comes out to play. You have to appreciate that it is an ode to campy 80s B-movie horror sci-fi, and once on board, the story is surprisingly compelling and draws you through mutant-filled forests and eerie caves and tantalizing set pieces towards a bombastic finale that's as gloriously over top as it is entertaining. But the key here is how smartly it justifies your hours spent building and surviving on the island, allowing you to take plenty of time out to indulge your creativity as the next narrative segment patiently awaits your attention, because this type of careful progression actually feels natural and meaningful within the unfolding narrative. The sprawling island is filled with countless set pieces that reward the curious, and it boasts a range of topology from snowy peaks to dense forests and winding rivers that, when matched with the rolling seasons, to say nothing of the tonal shifts during the game's day and night cycles, result in a tense and ever-changing atmosphere, doubled down by the masterful lighting design that can maximize the island's beauty one minute and be casting erratic shadows of mutants over cave walls the next. Considering that your weapon set begins with literal sticks and stones, it can lead to some pretty savage early difficulty spikes, but it really doesn't take that long for your expanding arsenal of overpowered weaponry and absurd traps to turn the experience into a glee-filled gore-fest of carnage. And while the iconic inventory screen is hard to forget once seen and so satisfying to use, it has to be said that it masks one of the game's flaws. At least from a base building standpoint anyway, because with its almost bottomless storage capacity and serving as the game's only real workstation, it effectively replaces the need for any base building systems, if not for the actual base itself. Everything you need, food, tools, medicine, can be crafted and carried or quickly acquired using a tool, effectively making the backpack a mobile base. And this is presumably by design to make the game more accessible for players not interested in the base building mechanics, but as a result, even the most elaborate bases are underused because trekking back to collect stockpiled ammo is rarely warranted, and traversing the island is actually pretty slow until way later in the game, all of which quietly undermines the whole point of building a base. However, if base building is what you're here for, then it actually doesn't matter, because by the time you clock onto this, you'll have had an amazing time building a base anyway, and having one does make your life easier at certain points, it has to be said. The game itself might not care if you live in a castle or squat in a tent with a shotgun, but however effective nomadic living might be in order to progress the storyline, it doesn't actually allow for the construction of spring-loaded traps that allow you to funnel enemies through carefully positioned doorways and watch them charge into kill zones disturbingly reminiscent of a Rube Goldberg cartoon, while you nip forwards into the maelstrom of carnage in order to reset them and then back off to watch it all happen again. Using wood, and stone, and bones, and whatever else you can harvest from the surroundings, the freedom of placement means you can set up shop in breathtaking locations, cliffside views, riverside hideaways, or deep in the woods where nobody can hear your enemies scream. From prefab blueprints through to the intuitive snap-and-play system, the refined mechanics support everything from simple shelters to sprawling, fleshed-out multi-level structures, kitted out with furniture and interactive storage right through to solar-powered wiring systems and lighting. And while the odd frustrations do exist, they are buried under an avalanche of refined mechanics. Despite making a boatload of cash and dropping jaws at launch, Sons of the Forest quietly slipped off the radar, and nobody's entirely sure why. But having dropped about 200 hours into this game, I would definitely say that with a price tag that's less than half of what equivalent games are charging on consoles these days, this really is a titan of its class that's not to be missed. Sons of the Forest wins the Most Visceral Base Building Experience Award. The premise of Raft is just brilliant in its simplicity. An unexplained event leaves you, and your partner unless you play solo, on a 2x2 raft floating across a featureless ocean strewn with bits of junk, which is about as unremarkable an introduction to a game as you can get. From the moment you take control, you'll find yourself fishing for resources and snapping sections to your raft like you were born knowing how. The crafting system that's built into your inventory can be pulled up at the touch of a button, and it's so intuitive that you'll master it from pretty much the first use, and even more so when you progress onto workbenches, because resources are automatically drawn from nearby storage containers, which result in an innovative crafting process that is so streamlined, it'll make crafting in all other games feel positively clunky. But most notably, Raft is a game that will blindside you with its depth like few other base builders can, because the simple cartoony graphics and lonely introduction that's void of any pre-narrative will lull you into a false sense of meager expectations. And then when you witness the first of the visually inventive and thought-provoking structures climb over the horizon and loom over you like a narrative tidal wave, the realization that desert islands are far from the only places you'll be exploring is alone enough to take your breath away, to say nothing of the fun you'll have launching expeditions from your raft. The rabbit hole goes pretty deep with this one, and as you uncover fragments of a world submerged in water, you'll start to grasp that you are not navigating today's world. Raft's chapters were released periodically, leading to subsequent quality of life editions finding their ways into earlier segments, such as the addition of NPCs who'd say a few lines before joining your crew.
Awesome. Let's head out.
But they were skillfully integrated so as not to mess with the tonally perfect delivery style of the game's compelling narrative. A breadcrumb trail of memos and notes are thoughtfully laid out to tell surprisingly moving tales that masterfully steer you through seemingly random set pieces, so that narrative progression feels totally organic as you nip at the heels of survivors before you, and in my opinion proves a masterclass in turning a modest budget into a narrative strength. By making the text-based delivery of content seem intentional, it perfectly captures the isolationist spirit of a vast and empty ocean void of hope, which reinforces your emotional attachment to your growing raft, because along with each cozy cosmetic addition salvaged from some forgotten outpost, your emotional bond with it is deepened as it transforms into a growing, floating tapestry that tells a rich and personal story of survival. And the light tone of the game is neatly matched to the intimidating presence of Bruce the Shark, mysteriously abandoned homes, and then even the constant threat of thirst and starvation, and countering these by stockpiling supplies, chasing down animals to populate your farm, and hunting for resources are all rewarding experiences to be found off the raft, but it is truly the base building that's the star here, making this one of the few games aimed directly at fans of the genre. Homemade paint through to scavenged decorations provide countless options for customization. Planks and plastic fished from the water give way to nails and bolts crafted from melted ore scavenged on the shores, allowing your rafts to evolve outward and upward. And there's practical considerations like wide wings that allow sweeping up of core resources, or a long nose that allows the spanning of shark-infested inlets, or a high tower that allows for additional visibility. There are no tutorials to show you how to do this, nor are there rewards or penalties beyond the maneuverability of your raft, and so this results in some brilliantly different styles of inventive gameplay. And as you push on, paddles are swapped out for sails that are swapped out for engines, and methods of automation that may seem like a pipe dream at first will become a key part of your build later, making the gameplay evolve alongside your raft as tasks like swapping out batteries will evolve into maintaining production farms that feed your power plant. Real estate is limited by engine power, which is limited by how much you can be bothered to hunt or farm fuel, and so building upward or rebuilding older parts of your raft as you progress becomes necessary, resulting in an extremely personal design which might be streamlined and efficient, or a patchwork of Frankenstein elements, or in the case of building with a friend, potentially a humorous merging of two clearly contrasting visions. The tight balance of evolving automation, ever-changing survival challenges, and non-stop creativity is endlessly satisfying, and the drip feed of a compelling narrative is expertly paced, making this game most definitely worthy of the base builder award for the most organic and streamlined experience. As always, a like or a subscribe is massively appreciated. And remember, the next 10 are all going to be early access or ongoing titles. So if you have any input on that, or there are any games I missed off this list, then be sure to let me know, as I'd love to make another one, or if I don't know it, I'll want to play it. Thank you very much. Peace out, and hopefully catch you next time.